Most people in the company knew my name, but very few knew what I actually did. Whenever a project failed, it landed on my desk. Whenever a client threatened to leave, I was the one who fixed the problem. I worked late nights, skipped weekends, and solved crises that kept the company alive, yet nobody seemed to notice. A few months earlier, one of our biggest clients was preparing to walk away. Executives panicked, managers blamed each other, and nobody had a solution. I spent 3 sleepless nights rebuilding the entire strategy from scratch. The client stayed. The company celebrated. My name was never mentioned. That was how things always worked. The only person whose opinion mattered to me was Sophia Reed. She was a senior executive respected by everyone in the company, smart, confident, and admired wherever she went. Sophia knew I was good at my job, but to her I was just another employee. Reliable, useful, easy to overlook. Then came the biggest opportunity in company history. A contract worth millions. For weeks the entire company worked under enormous pressure. While executives held meetings and managers gave orders, I stayed behind the scenes fixing problems, building presentations, and making sure everything worked. Finally, the day arrived. We won. The client signed the deal. The largest contract in company history. That evening, the CEO gathered everyone together to celebrate. He thanked managers, department heads, and executives. Then he publicly praised Sophia for her leadership. The room erupted into applause. I stood quietly at the back waiting. Maybe this time would be different. But the speech ended. My name was never mentioned. Not once. As everyone celebrated around me, I forced myself to smile and clap, but deep inside something hurt. Not because I wanted fame. Not because I wanted applause. But because I finally realized something painful. The company didn't know my value. And sometimes being invisible hurts far more than being hated. A few weeks after winning the biggest contract in company history, everything fell apart. A billion-dollar project suddenly collapsed, sending the entire company into chaos. Clients were furious, investors demanded answers, and executives desperately searched for someone to blame. At first, I wasn't worried. I knew my work. I knew the project. The real mistake had been made by a senior executive who had ignored multiple warnings months earlier. The truth should have protected me. Instead, the investigation produced documents I had never seen before. Reports appeared with my name attached to decisions I never made. Emails were presented as evidence. The deeper the investigation went, the worse things looked for me. Someone had carefully rewritten the story, and somehow I had become the villain. The atmosphere inside the office changed almost overnight. Coworkers who used to depend on me suddenly avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. People whispered behind my back. For the first time in years, I felt completely alone. Then came the final review meeting. The executives sat around a long conference table examining the evidence. Among them was Sophia. As she carefully read through the report, I found myself hoping she would notice something was wrong. Anyone who truly understood my work would know the accusations made no sense. But after several minutes, she quietly closed the file and looked toward management. The evidence is clear, she said. In that moment, it felt like someone had punched me in the chest. I barely heard the rest of the meeting. The only thing that mattered was that Sophia believed it. The one person I respected more than anyone else believed I was guilty. Maybe she wasn't angry. Maybe she was simply disappointed. Somehow that hurt even more. By the end of the day, management had their scapegoat. As I walked back to my desk, I realized the company had already made its decision. Nobody cared about the truth anymore. They only needed someone to blame. And the person they chose was me. What hurt the most wasn't losing my reputation. It was realizing that Sophia had turned away just like everyone else. The following week was a nightmare. The investigation was over. Management had already decided I was guilty, and no matter how many times I explained myself, nobody listened. The reports had been altered too perfectly. Every piece of evidence pointed at me. The truth no longer mattered. Then came the meeting that ended everything. The entire department was gathered in the conference room. Executives sat at the front while employees watched in silence. I stood alone in the middle of the room as the CEO listed every failure of the collapsed project. Each accusation felt like another nail in the coffin. Not once did anyone mention the years I had spent saving projects. Not once did anyone mention the contracts I had helped win. Not once did anyone mention the countless nights I stayed behind while everyone else went home. It was as if none of it had ever happened. When the CEO finally finished speaking, he slid a document across the table. A resignation letter. The message was clear. Leave quietly and the company wouldn't take things further. I looked around the room one last time. Dozens of people were there, people whose careers I had helped, people whose mistakes I had fixed, people who knew the kind of employee I was. Nobody said a word. Then my eyes found Sophia. A small part of me still hoped. One sentence. One question. One person willing to say something wasn't right. But Sophia remained silent. Her eyes stayed fixed on the documents in front of her. In that moment I understood. I was completely alone. With a shaking hand, I picked up the pen and signed my name. Just like that, years of loyalty ended with a signature. A few minutes later, I packed the few things from my desk into a cardboard box. Nobody stopped me. Nobody wished me luck. Most people pretended not to notice as I walked toward the exit. When the elevator doors opened, I took one final look at the office that had consumed so many years of my life. Then I saw Sophia. For a brief second, our eyes almost met. Almost, but she looked away. That hurt more than losing my job. Because deep down, I had already accepted that the company didn't value me. What I couldn't accept was that Sophia believed I deserved this. As the elevator doors closed, I realized something painful. I wasn't leaving because I had failed. I was leaving because nobody cared enough to see the truth. The day after leaving the company, I woke up without an alarm for the first time in years. No emails. No deadlines. No office to go back to. Just silence. For a few hours, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the resignation letter. Part of me wondered if everyone was right. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe the company would move on without me and become even more successful. Then my phone started ringing. Former coworkers. Not because they were worried about me. Because they wanted to laugh. Some mocked my resignation. Others joked that nobody would ever hire me again. A few posts even started appearing online, calling me the employee who had destroyed $1 billion project. My reputation was gone. And so was my career. At least that's what everyone believed. A week later, I made a decision that sounded completely insane. If nobody would give me a chance, I would create my own. I was going to build a company. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted to prove to myself that my value wasn't decided by a group of executives sitting in a conference room. The problem was that I had almost nothing. No investors. No reputation. No support. Only a dream. When people heard about my plan, they laughed. Some said I would be bankrupt within months. Others said I was too arrogant to accept reality. Even people who once worked beside me called the idea pathetic. Somewhere across the city, Sophia heard the same rumors. And like everyone else, she quietly believed I was making a mistake. Meanwhile, I signed the lease for a tiny office that barely looked like a company headquarters. The paint was peeling from the walls, the furniture was secondhand, and the computers were so old they struggled to start every morning. That office became my entire world. 3 employees joined me. Not because they believed we would succeed. Because they needed a job. As I looked around that small room on the first day, I felt both terrified and excited. We had almost no money. No clients. No guarantees. Just 4 people and a dream that most of the world expected to fail. But for the first time in years, I wasn't building someone else's future. I was building my own. For a while, it felt like everyone had been wrong about me. 3 months after opening our tiny office, we landed our first major client. It wasn't a billion-dollar contract, but for a company as small as ours, it felt life-changing. My employees celebrated. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe we might actually survive. Then everything fell apart. Without warning, the client canceled the contract. One phone call. That was all it took. Months of work disappeared overnight. The office that had once felt full of hope suddenly became painfully quiet. Bills started piling up. Rent was due. Cash reserves disappeared faster than I expected. Every time I opened our financial reports, the numbers looked worse. I stopped sleeping. Every night I sat alone in the office staring at spreadsheets, searching for a solution that didn't exist. Then I overheard something that broke my heart. 2 of my employees were talking after work. They weren't angry. They were scared. One of them quietly asked how much longer the company could survive. The other admitted he had started applying for new jobs. I couldn't blame them. They had families to support. Dreams didn't pay bills. That night after everyone went home, I remained alone in the office. Looking around the room, I realized these people had trusted me when nobody else would. They had taken a chance on a man the entire industry had written off. And now I was about to fail them. The next morning, I made a decision. A week later, my apartment was sold. It was the last valuable thing I owned. The place where I had spent years of my life. The place I called home. I signed the papers without hesitation. Every dollar went into the company. Nobody knew. Not my employees. Not my former coworkers. Not even Sophia. When payday arrived, everyone received their salaries on time. The relief on their faces made the sacrifice worth it. One employee even smiled and said, "Looks like we're going to be okay after all." I smiled back. But inside, I knew the truth. The company account was almost empty. My personal account was empty. And I no longer had a home to return to. That evening, after everyone left, I sat alone in the office and looked around the room. The old computers. The worn desks. The flickering lights. Everything I owned was now inside those four walls. If this company failed, I would lose everything. For the first time since starting this journey, fear finally caught up with me. But even then, I couldn't give up. Because if I quit now, everyone who said I would fail would be right. So I stayed in that tiny office long after midnight, alone in the darkness, desperately searching for one last way to save the dream that was slipping through my hands. While I was fighting to keep my company alive, things weren't going much better at my old company. The contract we had 1 month earlier was starting to fall apart. Projects missed deadlines, clients became frustrated, revenue dropped quarter after quarter. The executives kept blaming market conditions, but everyone could feel something was wrong. That was when Sophia started asking questions. At first, she simply wanted to understand why the company was struggling, but the deeper she looked, the stranger things became. Projects that were once completed effortlessly were now failing. Problems that used to be solved in hours were taking weeks. Entire teams seemed lost without direction. Then she noticed something. Almost every successful project from the past few years had one thing in common. My name. The discovery bothered her. So she kept digging. She reviewed old reports, project records, and internal emails. What started as curiosity quickly turned into shock. Again and again, she found evidence showing that critical solutions had come from me. Major clients had been saved because of my work. Entire systems had been built by me. Yet the credit had gone elsewhere. Mostly to senior executives. The deeper she investigated, the uglier the truth became. Reports had been altered. Achievements had been reassigned. Failures had been hidden. Then she found the documents related to the billion-dollar project. The project that destroyed my career. Sophia spent hours reviewing every detail. When she finally reached the original files, her hands started shaking. The evidence against me had been fabricated. Emails had been modified. Reports had been rewritten. The real mistake belonged to a senior executive who had manipulated the investigation to protect himself. For several minutes, Sophia simply stared at the screen. Unable to move. Unable to breathe. Because the truth was now impossible to ignore. I had been innocent. The man blamed for destroying the company had actually spent years saving it. The employee they humiliated had been the foundation holding everything together. And she had helped destroy him. That realization hit her harder than anything else. She remembered the meetings. The resignation letter. The moment I looked toward her, hoping someone would speak. And she had remained silent. Not because she hated me. Because she believed the lies. For the first time in years, Sophia felt ashamed of herself. While I was selling my apartment just to keep my small company alive, she had been sitting in an executive office built on work that should have been credited to me. The guilt became unbearable. Late that evening, after everyone left, Sophia sat alone in her office staring at my resignation file. A file that should never have existed. Slowly tears filled her eyes. Not because the company was failing. Not because executives had lied. But because she finally understood something that broke her heart. An innocent man had lost everything. And she had helped make it happen. A week after discovering the truth, Sophia showed up at my office. Calling it an office was generous. It was a small room with peeling paint, old computers, and furniture that looked older than some of the employees. Through the glass window, I noticed her expensive car parked outside. For a moment, I thought she had the wrong address. When she walked in, the room immediately fell silent. My employees recognized her. Everyone in the industry knew who Sophia Reed was. I stood up and invited her into my office. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she placed a thick folder on my desk. I know the truths. Inside were the investigation files, the altered reports, the fake evidence, and proof that I had been innocent all along. For months, I had imagined this moment. I thought I would be angry. I thought I would demand answers. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Sophia lowered her head. I'm sorry, her voice trembled. I'm sorry for believing the lies, I'm sorry for abandoning you, and I'm sorry for not defending you when you needed someone. Tears slowly formed in her eyes. I ruined your life. For a moment I simply looked at her, then I gave her a small smile. It's okay. Those two words hurt her more than any accusation ever could, because she knew it wasn't okay. I had lost my reputation, my career, and nearly my future, yet I wasn't blaming her. The guilt on her face became even heavier. A few moments later, she slid another document across my desk. The board wanted me back, executive position, triple salary, full authority, everything I had spent years working toward, everything they had denied me before. They'll publicly clear your name, she said softly. You'll finally get the recognition you deserve. I looked at the offer, then slowly pushed it back toward her. No, Sophia froze. For the first time since arriving, she looked completely shocked. I glanced around the tiny office at the old computers, the worn desks, and the employees who had stayed beside me when I had nothing. Then I smiled. For the first time in my life, I'm building something that's mine. Sophia stared at me in silence. At that moment, she finally saw something she had never noticed before. Not an employee, not a scapegoat, not a victim. She saw a man strong enough to walk away from everything he once dreamed about. As she left the office that day, she carried two feelings with her. Relief that I had finally been proven innocent, and the painful realization that she might have recognized my worth far too late. A few days after visiting my office, Sophia walked into the company's executive boardroom for what would become her final meeting. The company was still struggling. Projects continued failing, clients kept leaving, and investors were demanding answers. When Sophia submitted her resignation, the room fell silent. Nobody could believe what they were hearing. The CEO was the first to react. You're making a mistake. Then came the offers. A promotion. A bigger office. More authorities. More money than she had ever earned before. Everything she had spent years working to achieve. But Sophia refused all of it. Because for the first time, she could see what the company really was. Years of lies, stolen credit, and corruption hidden behind expensive suits and impressive titles. Staying would mean pretending none of it had happened. So she walked away. The news spread through the industry within hours. People were shocked. Some thought she had lost her mind. Others assumed another company had offered her an even bigger position. The truth was far more surprising. A week later, Sophia walked through the door of my tiny office, carrying a single box of belongings. I genuinely thought she was there for a visit. Then she placed an employment contract on my desk. I'd like to work here. For several seconds, I simply stared at her. Why? It was the only question I could think of. She had everything. Power, respect, influence. A career most people could only dream about. And my company was barely surviving. Sophia smiled sadly. Because when everyone turned against you, you stood alone. I said nothing. She continued. You lost everything because people chose the easy lie instead of the difficult truth. And even after all of that, you didn't become bitter. Her eyes met mine. I spent years working beside powerful people, but you're the first person I've ever respected. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside the office, my employees watched through the glass walls, completely confused about what was happening. Then I slowly smiled. Are you sure about this? Sophia looked around the tiny office, the old computers, the worn desks, and the uncertain future waiting ahead. Then she nodded. I'm sure. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt since starting the company. Hope. Because Sophia wasn't joining for money. She wasn't joining for power. She was joining because she believed in me. And neither of us realized it yet, but that decision would change both of our lives forever. Sophia joining my company sent shockwaves through the industry. Nobody could understand why one of the most respected executives in the country would leave a powerful corporation for a struggling company operating out of a tiny office. Some called her foolish. Others said she would regret it within months. The old company reacted even worse. The CIO took it personally. First came the rumors. Clients suddenly started hearing stories that my company was unstable. Then contracts we were negotiating mysteriously disappeared. Longtime business partners stopped returning calls. Soon after that, legal notices began arriving at our office, one after another. The message was clear. Destroy him. For a while, it felt like the entire world was against us. There were nights when Sophia and I were the last people left in the office. The lights would stay on long after midnight as we worked through problems together. Sometimes we argued over strategies. Sometimes we sat in complete silence reviewing reports. Sometimes we were so exhausted that cheap coffee became our dinner. But no matter how difficult things became, Sophia never left. One evening, after losing another major client, I found her alone in the office staring at the rejection email. For a moment, guilt washed over me. You still have time to leave, I told her. Nobody would blame you. Sophia looked up and smiled. Do you regret starting this company? I shook my head. Then why would I regret joining it? For a moment, neither of us spoke. That answer stayed with me. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, our hard work began paying off. We won a small contract, then another. A client who had been unhappy with the old company decided to give us a chance. One success became two became five. They weren't huge victories, but they were ours. And somewhere between the late nights, shared struggles, and impossible challenges, something began changing between us. I started looking for Sophia whenever I entered a room. She started bringing me coffee before long meetings. We celebrated every small victory together and carried every failure together. Neither of us talked about it. Neither of us needed to. The feelings were growing on their own. What amazed me most was that Sophia never once looked back, not when the lawsuits arrived, not when money became tight, not when everyone said she had ruined her career. The old company expected her to return eventually. She never did. Because the more they tried to destroy us, the stronger we became. And for the first time since leaving that company, I wasn't fighting alone anymore. The war between our companies continued for months, but something had started changing. The old company wasn't just losing clients anymore. It was falling apart from the inside. Employees were leaving, projects were failing, investors were demanding answers. For years, the executives had hidden their corruption behind strong profits and impressive growth. Now those profits were gone and the cracks were becoming impossible to hide. Then everything exploded. One morning, a former executive released thousands of internal documents to regulators and the media. Hidden payments, manipulated reports, stolen credit, fake investigations. Years of corruption suddenly became public. The news spread like wildfire. Investors panicked. Stock prices crashed. Clients immediately began terminating contracts. Within days, several executives resigned to protect themselves. Others publicly blamed each other. The same leaders who once acted untouchable were now desperately fighting to survive. And at the center of it all was the CEO. The man who had destroyed my career. The man who had called me a liability. The man who convinced everyone that I was responsible for the billion-dollar failure. Now his name was appearing in every headline. For the first time, he couldn't hide behind someone else's sacrifice. As the scandal grew, the company officially entered bankruptcy proceedings. The giant that once dominated the industry was collapsing before everyone's eyes. Then something happened that I never expected. My phone started ringing. Former managers, former coworkers, people who had ignored me, people who had mocked me, people who had watched me walk out of that building without saying a single word. Now they were calling for help. Some wanted jobs. Others wanted partnerships. A few simply wanted forgiveness. One former manager even admitted, "We should have listened to you." Years earlier, hearing those words would have meant everything to me. Now they meant nothing. That chapter of my life was over. One evening, after another successful day at our office, I stood by the window looking out at the city skyline. Sophia walked over and handed me a cup of coffee. "The old company filed for bankruptcy today," she said quietly. I nodded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I thought I would feel victorious when this day finally arrived. I thought I would enjoy watching them fall. Instead, I felt strangely sad. Not for the executives. Not for the CEO. But for the employees who had trusted the wrong leaders and were now paying the price. Sophia seemed to understand exactly what I was thinking. "You still care about them, don't you?" she asked. I looked down at the city below. Most of them weren't the ones who made those decisions. Sophia smiled. That answer told her everything. The people who destroyed my career had lost everything. But somehow, they still hadn't managed to destroy the part of me that cared about others. And neither of us realized it yet, but the collapse of the old company wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the biggest twist yet. A few weeks after the bankruptcy announcement, I received a phone call that changed everything. The bankruptcy court was looking for buyers. At first, I assumed they wanted a large corporation or investment group. Then I heard the company's name. My old company. The same company that had destroyed my reputation. The same company that had escorted me out of the building like a criminal. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. That evening, I sat alone in my office staring at the proposal. Sophia sat across from me, quietly reading the documents. "You couldn't do it," she said. I looked at her and laughed softly. Years ago, they wouldn't even listen to my ideas. Now they want me to buy the company. Sophia smiled. Years ago, they didn't know your value. The following month, I walked into the headquarters building for the first time since my resignation. The memories hit me immediately. The lobby, the elevators, the conference rooms. Every corner reminded me of the day I lost everything. I could still remember carrying a cardboard box toward the exit while employees watched in silence. I could still remember looking back one final time and seeing Sophia avoid eye contact. Back then, security escorted me out. Today, the receptionist stood up to welcome me. Life had a strange sense of humor. When I entered the boardroom, the atmosphere became painfully quiet. Several board members lowered their eyes. Others couldn't even look at me. These were the same people who had signed off on my resignation without asking a single question. Now they were waiting for my decision. Sophia sat beside me. Not as an executive from the old company. As my partner. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. One board member finally broke the silence. "We hope you'll consider saving the company." Saving the company. Years earlier, I had begged them to listen before disaster struck. Nobody cared. Now they were asking for help. For a moment, I looked around the room and imagined how easy it would be to reject them, to walk away and let the company disappear forever. Part of me wanted to. But then I thought about the employees. The ordinary workers who had families to support. The people who would lose their jobs because of mistakes they never made. And suddenly the answer became clear. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about justice. I signed the agreement. Just like that, the company was mine. The room fell silent. Not because they were upset. Because they finally understood the truth. The employee they had underestimated. The man they had blamed. The man they had thrown away. Had returned as the owner. As Sophia and I walked out of the boardroom together, I glanced one last time at the people sitting behind that table. Years ago, they had all the power. Today, they had none. And for the first time since leaving that building, I felt something I never expected. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Peace. Years passed. The company that had once struggled to survive became one of the largest in the industry. The tiny office with peeling paint and outdated computers was long gone. In its place stood a company built on the values I had once searched for but never found. Employees were respected. Ideas were rewarded. Hard work was recognized. The toxic culture that had destroyed so many careers had disappeared. And because of that, the company continued growing year after year. One morning, I walked through headquarters on my way to a board meeting. The building was alive with energy. Employees greeted each other, teams worked together, and people actually enjoyed being there. As I passed through the hallways, employees stood and smiled. "Good morning, sir." "Morning, boss." Some nodded respectfully. Others stopped what they were doing just to greet me. Every time it happened, I felt a little uncomfortable. Because I couldn't stop remembering the past. I remembered walking through these same hallways years earlier, while people whispered behind my back. I remembered the looks of doubt. The mockery. The silence. I remembered carrying a cardboard box toward the exit while everyone watched. Back then, nobody believed in me. Now those same hallways felt completely different. Not because people feared me. Because they respected me. When I finally reached my office, I paused for a moment before opening the door. Sophia was already inside. She was standing near the window, overlooking the city. The same woman who once believed the lies. The same woman who later walked away from everything to stand beside me. The same woman who never left, even when failure seemed inevitable. She turned and smiled. That smile still had the power to stop me in my tracks. Then she placed something on my desk. A wedding rings. My wedding rings. I looked at her in confusion. Sophia laughed softly. "Ready for the mating, boss." I couldn't help smiling. Years ago, I thought success meant proving people wrong. I thought it meant becoming richer than the people who betrayed me. I thought it meant revenge. But standing there looking at Sophia, I finally understood how wrong I had been. Success wasn't the company. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the respect. Success was waking up every morning knowing I had stayed true to myself. Success was building something meaningful. Success was having people I could trust. And most importantly, success was having someone who chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. I slipped on the ring and walked toward her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Because we both remembered where the journey began. A ruined reputation. A resignation letter. A tiny office. A dream everyone laughed at. And now somehow we were here. I gently took her hand. "Ready?" I said. Together we walked out of the office and toward the future we had built side by side. Years ago I lost everything. Today I had everything I truly wanted. Success, respect, and the woman who believed in me when the rest of the world turned away. As the office doors closed behind us, I couldn't help but smile. Because the greatest victory wasn't becoming the owner of the company that once rejected me. It was becoming the man they never thought I could be. The man they underestimated.